There were some dramatic games in round 2 of the Sinquefield Cup. The first one I'd like to look at is Veselin Topalov against Hikaru Nakamura. Topalov really enjoying a fantastic run of form at the moment. Of course, he won Norway Chess and he won in the first round. So we joined the game after 51 moves. It's been a real heavyweight struggle with Topalov had 2 bishops playing against 2 knights. And they've arrived at this position, which at first glance doesn't look to be too problematic for black. This knight on d5 looks pretty good, has a strong outpost, and a reasonable pawn structure. This king is in a slightly odd position though, and that's what Topalov now exploits. Well, first of all, he played a3. This is played because he wants to bring this rook away from the 5th rank, and of course that pawn would need protection at the moment the knight is pinned. So rook e6 from Nakamura. At the moment black can only wait. This is his problem. And now rook c1, and in this position black is in a kind of zugzwang. It's very interesting. First of all, let's see what happens, for example, if the knight goes into e3. Well, white can actually play for checkmate here. It's really beautiful. So, okay, black waits. White takes on e3, and if pawn takes, then king g3 followed by f4 mate, or if let's say rook f8, then you don't need to capture the pawn. You can simply play bishop e5, and that king is caught on g5 and f4 follows. Or if rook takes, then the king pawn ending is actually very easily winning because black's queenside majority is stymied. White just plays f4 check and brings the king over to take the e pawn. What other moves are there? Well, rook d6 is similar. Then rook e1, threatening a deadly check on e5. And again, if knight e3, then this same sacrifice leaves black completely lost. So, in this position, Nakamura tried knight e7. And now this bishop retreat is really strong. Could have played this before, but actually with the knight on e7, this is much, much stronger. So the threat is bishop h4 mate. The king goes back, and this allows white to make a clean breakthrough on the king's side. So g5 and bishop takes. Now with this exchange, white creates a strong passed h-pawn, already far advanced. The f-pawn is weakened and white's king is ready to come through to g4. And black has no counterplay here. You can see that this queenside majority, these 3 pawns are completely stymied. Basically this is a winning position, and Topalov finished off very well. I should say, if Nakamura makes an attempt to get counterplay, the problem is this leaves his rook completely offside, and actually white can push through very easily, and this, well, white is actually going to win this knight. The rook, black's rook, is just way out of play. Nakamura tried knight d5, the king came in. It's actually very, very easy for white to play this, and simply bishop takes pawn. Nakamura exchanged off the bishop, but now in effect white is 2 pawns up because black's queenside majority is going nowhere, and white can simply very steadily advance his pawns on the king's side. Okay, here we go. Rook c3, a careful move, just protecting the 3rd rank, making sure the rook doesn't break through. And okay, white just begins the advance. f4 is coming. Okay, this is a desperate last try from Nakamura, where he has no counterplay, but okay, he's trying to create something, but this makes life, well, I was going to say even easier. It's all very, very simple. White just starts taking pawns here, and black can't stop the advance of these pawns. And now Topalov doesn't even bother using his king, he just pushes these pawns. I mean, it is just like Space Invaders. One of these 3 pawns is going to go through, and this is really good endgame technique. Rook c8. It's a really comical position. Black can take any 3 of these pawns, but one of them will go through. So, for example, if rook takes pawn, push, threatening to make a queen, this gets taken, f7, and the pawn goes through. Nakamura tried b3, but it's all the same. Okay, this is nice, h7, and the pawn is going through. Here Nakamura resigned. He could have tried b2, but he didn't bother with this. I'm not surprised. Well, let's just see what might have happened. You can make a queen, and here black's king is just getting checkmated because white has the first move. If this were a blitz game, I can imagine playing something like this. Of course, there are ways to checkmate, but this is foolproof. In a blitz game, you don't need to think. You can just play in this very standard way and win the queen like that. So, well, great technique from Topalov. The other standout game of the round was Fabiano Caruana against Magnus Carlsen. Of course, both these players lost in the first round. Very interesting to see what would happen in their game. It's very, very complicated. This is a real scrap. It came out of a Spanish, it's a typical Spanish position with these pawns on e4 and e5 locked in the middle of the board. But Caruana has made some progress on the queen side. You can see he's managed to advance this a pawn, leaving a6 a little bit weak, and also after the a pawn advance, this pawn on b4 is now out on a limb and a little bit weak. Here I'd anticipated that Carlsen would play bishop c8 to perhaps exchange off that knight, and well, his pieces are well centralised, and I would have thought that should be enough to equalise the position. But instead, well, Magnus clearly wanted to really press today to set his opponent as many problems as possible, but taking a real risk to do so, and this game turned into an absolute street brawl. So Caruana makes to take this pawn on b4. Carlsen plays king h8. Now this is the prelude to playing g6. So he's given up a pawn and plays g6 to expel this knight from f5. And Magnus Carlsen with black is hoping to use these two bishops. At the moment they're not doing much. But this is such a risky decision to play g6 because it leaves black's king a little bit exposed actually once that f pawn has disappeared, whereas white's king is much safer with these pawns on f2 and g3. Okay, the queen switched over, so clearly there's a threat to take here. The bishop moved, and now the knight has to drop back, and this is the point that Carlsen can take the pawn on e4. So he's managed to get to open the position a little bit for those bishops, but still, this is an excellent move from Caruana. Excellent positional move. So he's exchanging off a pair of bishops. And this knight looks pretty strong in the middle, and this bishop on g5, well, it does have interesting possibilities later on, as we'll see, but this is actually turning in white's favour. So Carlsen is desperately trying to create something on the king side, hoping that white's king is a little bit weak. In fact, white's king should be fine here. Queen c2, I think a good move from Caruana, a good practical move. The queen coming back to protect things here. Looking at g6. Okay, now he has to be a bit careful because suddenly there's a threat here. Of course, that queen cannot leave control over d1. Queen g6 would allow rook d1. But he could have played queen e4. The players were in terrible time pressure, and it's quite possible that Caruana just thought, well, I can't play queen e4 because of this move rook d1. In fact, here white can get away with it because rook e1 saves, and obviously that's winning. This is the kind of move that I'm sure Caruana really wanted to play, because after queen e4, well, black is going to have to exchange the queens because e5 is on. And here, this is so pleasant for white. Material is even, but that knight is so much stronger than the bishop. And also, black's king now starts to be rather vulnerable. So, for example, after, let's say, rook d5, heading for this a pawn, something like rook here, rook takes g6. Now, I'm not saying that this is a winning position for white, but what I am saying is this is extremely unpleasant for black to play when this bishop is so poor. Black's king is vulnerable. You know, this second rook could perhaps look to join in the attack here on the 7th rank. And look at the difference. White's king with the pawns on f2 and g3 absolutely rock solid. That would be very tough. Instead, Caruana played rook e4. When you're in time trouble, it looks like a very solid move because you're protecting the rook. You can perhaps bring the rook back here to defend the first rank, and also you're putting more pressure on the e5 pawn. But rook d2, good move from Carlsen, making the situation very complicated. And here, Caruana, down to his last few seconds, made a terrible blunder. He should have played, well, queen b3 or queen a4. Let's take a look at them. So if queen b3, well, Carlsen should be okay here with rook d1. And now, well, if rook e1, then the rook comes back, and this should be a draw. Alternatively, after rook d1 check, it is possible to take that with the queen. First glance, it still looks very nice for white, actually. That bishop doesn't look great, but in fact, h5 and h4 gives black just enough counterplay. Of course, that bishop can't be taken because the rook is on. And if pawn takes, then black can give perpetual check. That king isn't escaping. So queen b3 was possible, queen a4 also possible, and now there's a very nice move actually. Bishop f4, so threatening to sacrifice on g3, and if this is taken, once again this is actually a draw by perpetual check. No problem. So that bishop in some circumstances can turn out to be a very strong piece. But in the game, Caruana took on d2. Fatal. And once the queen on c2 moves, then queen takes f2 and mate. Well, what a scrap that game was, and what mental strength Carlsen displayed there in coming back after this dreadful defeat in round one. He played very poorly, in my opinion. Yeah, brilliant game from Caruana. Well, not brilliant, but he showed great mental toughness in playing this game. After 2 rounds, Veselin Topalov is in the sole lead in the tournament. He has 2 out of 2. I should say that Grishuk beat Anand today, so Grishuk is back. Anand started with 2 losses. Caruana has started with 2 losses. But Magnus is there on 1 out of 2. It's a really extraordinary tournament, but very early days. Thanks for watching.